All right, so next up, let's work on getting the delete functionality to work. So there's something we can click on a to-do, a button, or just a little X that will then delete it, not only from the API, but also from the DOM. And it's very similar to how we did the create, where we have some code that does the API call written in the to-do list component because it manages the to-do state, and it's triggered by something in a child component. In this case, it will be on to-do item. And the route itself, it's a delete request we need to send to /API/todos/ a particular ID. So let's start off, let's go about this actually in a different order. Let's define a delete to do function here, or method that takes in an ID. That ID is the ID of the to do we want to delete. So we're kind of writing this in the opposite way, where we write the API call first and then we trigger it later. We're just going to start by writing it. It's going to be very similar, just a fetch again. The only difference, well, one of the only differences is the URL, because we now need to construct a new URL. So let's call it const delete URL equals API URL plus slash, and actually let's see, did I put the slash in here? Not yet. Let's put the slash up here. And then down here, I'll just be able to do plus ID that we're passing it. So this will construct a URL like /API/todos/67ABC, whatever the ID is. Okay, then what I'm going to start by doing is actually copying the entire fetch from add to do. So you don't have to watch me type that whole thing, and just edit it. So we're going to fetch delete URL instead. Method is now going to be a delete. You can get rid of the headers and the body because we're not sending any information along. We're just making a delete request. Then we'll keep the error checking the same. Technically, there's no response that we should expect back, so we don't have to return response.json. The only time there would be a response.json is if there's an error, because the way the API works. So we shouldn't get anything back. But even if we do, it doesn't really matter, because all we're going to do is afterwards, let's just change this. We're going to set state to remove the to-do that we just tried to remove. So we have the ID, remember, that's coming in here. And rather than setting state like this, we're going to first filter out. So let's just do to-dos equals this dot state dot to-dos, so the current to-dos dot filter. And then what we're going to try and do is where to-do dot underscore ID is not equal to the ID. So basically get rid of the one that we're trying to delete. And then we're going to reassign state. So this dot set state, and we'll just say that to-dos is equal to to-dos, which is kind of confusing, but remember, we're just taking to-do out of this and reassigning it to a to-dos variable, and then we're updating the to-dos part of the state to equal that new to-dos variable, which is everything that was there minus the one we tried to delete. Okay, so we have this defined. Hopefully there's no errors, but we'll know in a moment, because right now we're not ever calling this. So what we want to do is pass this on down to each individual to-do item. So here's where we're creating the to-do items. So we're actually going to pass something in here. We're going to have an on delete equals this dot delete to do, and we need to bind it. The problem is we can't do it up here. Where is that? Scrolling forever, because we also need to pass in some data that's particular to each individual to do item. So we're going to bind it down here. This dot to do delete to do dot bind this, and then our second argument is going to be t dot underscore ID. So for each to do item, remember we're mapping over, t refers to the actual to do data coming from the API or in the state. We're going to take that and take the ID and pass that in. So we're binding this, and then the second argument will actually, when this function is called, will pass in this data as an argument. So then up here, we'll have an ID to work with. Okay, so we're almost there, but we're still never calling this in the to-do item. So down in to-do item, first thing I'm going to do is pull this out as well. We'll just call it on delete. And then we need to use an on click to call it. And I'm going to restructure my code here just a tiny little bit, because what's going to happen is we're going to have an on delete and an on toggle, two different things where you click on maybe an X or a button, we want to delete the to-do, but if you click anywhere else, we want to update the status, right? So if I click here, I don't want to delete it, but if I click on an X over here or a delete button, I do. So I'm going to add two parts to this. I'm just going to wrap them in a span. So we have our li, and after name, I'll just add a span here. We could do a button as well, but I'm just going to start, and I'll just put an X with a space on either side. And this span, when we click it, so we'll do an on click equals on delete, and that should be it. So when we click that span with the X, we're calling on delete, which itself is passed in here. And we don't have to provide the ID in to-do item, we're doing it here. And that in turn calls delete to do. Okay, let's see what happens. Let's try and delete one of these duplicates. Let's open up the network tab as well so we can see what happens. So it looks like it worked. Here's the request that was sent, I believe. No, that was the first request. Here's the one that was sent. The delete request, you can see it was sent to /API/to-dos/that ID, and it's no longer here. If we refresh the page, it's gone. Great. So I click anywhere else though, nothing happens, and that's good. We only want it on this X. Again, we'll worry about styling later, but this is fine for now. Try one more. Looks good. Let's also try when we create one and just make sure it also works that we can delete it. And I'm just refreshing just to make sure things are persisting how they should in the database and everything looks good. Okay, before I forget, let's actually update our to-do form so it doesn't start as LOL haha. Let's make the initial input value just an empty string. And we have our delete working. You can see again, the bulk of the logic here is just the fetch, the API call itself. Okay, so next we're gonna do very, very similar thing, but working on toggling or updating the status, the completed status. So it will basically follow the same pattern, except rather than a delete request, we're going to send a put request.